A review copy was provided by Square Enix. Hello everyone, Adam here, and today I'm discussing Octopath Traveler 2. I've completed 100% of the game, got all the rare items, and got the Platinum Trophy. This is technically a sequel to the 2017 game, but you don't have to play the original to understand what happens here, similar to all the major entries within the Final Fantasy universe. Instead, the game is its own, but technically it does take place after the events of the first game, with one of the optional super bosses. Similar to the first game, you take control of 8 characters who follow their own narrative, with connected points leading to a final confrontation. One of the biggest issues of the first game was that despite the stories being entertaining, the characters rarely interacted with one another outside specific travel banter scenes, where they would talk to one another in exclusive cutscenes in taverns. That's still here, and you can access these dialogues in the game's menu even if you haven't triggered them yet at any time. Instead, each of the stories are connected, but more on that later. At the start of the game, you can choose any one of the 8 characters to start with, and the rest are marked on the map. This is a profound choice as you cannot swap out this character until you've completed the character's full 4 chapter story. In addition, the character you choose will determine who speaks to the final boss before the fight and who will have the final speaking role during the epilogue. Unfortunately, you cannot change this, and if you want to see all the other dialogue options for this, you'll have to either complete the 100-hour campaign multiple times or find them on YouTube. Those worried you'll be locked out of gameplay content, don't worry. No matter who you choose, every piece of content is available to you, just this very specific speaking sequences. Once you complete the opening character, you're mostly free to go anywhere you want. Find the other heroes, complete side stories, or do whatever you see fit. I say mostly because areas leading to them could prove dangerous due to certain areas having very high level enemies, which are showcased to the player in the lower left hand screen, and I'll discuss on this a little more later on the gameplay section. Regardless, once you find the ally, you can instantly recruit them or start their story from Chapter 2 or play Chapter 1 right away. If you choose not to play Chapter 1 right away, you can visit any tavern and play the chapter later. However, you cannot do this after completing the chapters, which is disappointing. If you can play Chapter 1 at any time, I see that there's no reason you shouldn't be able to replay any of the other chapters in the game, seeing that this game is so long, and well, that should be an option if you want to retake certain boss fights. Each character has 4 chapters linked to their narrative with a recommended level, but new to the game is crossed path stories. These are 2-part stories, usually around 2 hours long, that have 2 specific travelers going on an individual story. These are isolated tales made to build camaraderie among the characters and highlight both characters' unique personalities. This definitely helps in building the characters' friendships beyond the travel banter and helps give their bond more weight for the endgame content, but doesn't really help convince the player of why they even started traveling together. I get they can't dedicate so much time to try and establish the foundations of the bonds considering how many variations there would be among the 8 travelers. Even Dragon Age Origins had a run for its money when interconnecting stories, especially when you play Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition. They had so many variations to take into consideration, so here I understand with an isolated story it's a bit more difficult. So they just go for the more straightforward method of I need your help and you look like someone who can help me situation. However, the game does attempt to showcase everyone in the party was destined to meet during the end game. After beating all the main chapters and cross-path stories, you can engage in the game's true end game. This is where all the connections are made apparent through text entries, travel banter, and cutscenes. The classic information dump is here, but if you're astute enough, you'll be able to pick out these threads before all of this happens. The game does warn you of this since once you trigger the world changes dramatically and you cannot revert to the original world until you complete the endgame situation. On a personal note, my favorite stories were the Merchant Particio and the Hunter Ochet. While the game definitely takes more of a positive outlook on the characters where they rarely showcase negative traits, the narratives can get really dark, dealing with subjects like extreme poverty, implied R-word actions I cannot say on YouTube, and mass death caused by extreme grief. The narratives can suffer from pacing problems where they have to jump to major events constantly, since each of the 4 stories are about 4 hours long. But thanks to great writing, the stories never feel rushed or lacking. You will need to grind out a lot of experience to get to the next chapter, which is expected, as the final boss for each of these stories will test your mettle and tactical skills, specifically to make it to the point where you have to master the abilities of each of the characters whose story you're engaging with. Added more weight to the narratives are next chapter side stories. A lot of the optional content is busy work to the extent of just trying to showcase the world in a new light from different characters, but the next chapter side stories help provide conclusions to specific characters within the core stories of each of these heroes. Essentially, it's a happily ever after ending that wraps up everything within these secondary characters, which I personally appreciate. It definitely adds more weight of saying what happened to this character, then you learn later, okay, this is what happened. Now, let's talk about the characters you'll be traveling with, because I think it's very significant to the story. I chose Throne first, who is a professional thief who's part of this deadly society called the Black Snakes, who enslaves children into a life of crime, seeking her freedom now that she just wants nothing to do with the organization. She has a collar on her neck and she cannot leave the organization until she gets all the keys. Throne is definitely the most disturbing of the stories as you learn the origins of this organization, and trust me, you won't see it coming, but she also serves as your best damage dealer, so it's definitely a highlight of how these characters operate throughout their narratives. It showcases their core skills within their story, and her being a high damage dealer, you definitely see that throughout the narrative. Ochet is a half-human, half-beast creature called a beastling. The hunter, along with her society, is obsessed with meat and maintaining the balance between nature and the people who take from it. And humans within her story are shown to be greedy and always taking. It's kind of very cliche, classic stuff. Seeking to save her home from a dark calamity that's currently happening. Like with Hanet from the previous game, Ochet can tame creatures, but unlike the previous game, once you tame the creatures, you can keep them as long as you have them in your party. You can discard them at any time, but you only have a certain amount of slots, and once you discard them, they turn into jerky, which has unique healing properties and benefits. Perhaps the biggest change is the ability to tame mini-bosses once you defeat them, and you can find them within their specific location, but you can only use them once per battle. There is currently a glitch within the game that allows you to use more than once, but I think it might be fixed by the time I put up this review. Hikari is a bastard prince who is seeking to retake the throne after his half-brother staged a coup. Hikari is the best damage dealer and can take a lot of hits, and his story definitely deals with a lot of darker elements, such as giving in to the bloodthirst after having a very difficult event happen in his life. I won't spoil it, but something happens that causes him to give in to his bloodthirst, and he has periods of violent episodes where he completely starts murdering people. Cisne is the doctor trying to find out the origins of a deadly plague and regain her memories while finding out why everyone's afraid of the organization that she comes from. As a doctor, she serves as a more support healer, having healing negative and providing negative status effect moves in her list of abilities, so she can cause great harm and great healing support, but she doesn't really serve as your primary healer. Oswald is a scholar and serves as your primary damage-dealing mage who has been wrongly imprisoned and seeks revenge for the person responsible. So Oswald's story is unique that you have to complete both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 before you can explore the world. In a lot of ways, Oswald's story is a much more graphic interpretation of the Count of Monte Cristo, which is pretty awesome. I love that film, the 2002 version. Terminos, which I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing his name, I've heard his name hundreds of times and I still can't say correctly, is a priest of the Order of Sacred Flame, which is basically the overarching religion within this world, and the group's detective. He's seeking the person responsible for killing this world's version of the Pope, and has a more open view of his faith that can borderline be sacrilege. He's more devoted to the Sacred Flame than a lot of people interpret, but he never allows that faith to trample over raw facts. He always deals with raw facts over his own faith, and his ally journeying throughout his adventure, Crick, is more faithful than he is someone who looks at facts. So it definitely has a really good dynamic going there. As a cleric, Terminos is the primary healer and can definitely heal you above your current critical health yield. So he's definitely the someone you seek for in every party. Agnia is definitely the more positive versions of the game's narratives that you'll be engaging with. A skilled dancer, she seeks to become a famous star, but finds out outside her naive worldview from growing up in a small village has made her unprepared for the actual real world. At first, her support skills don't seem that significant, but eventually become very paramount against the tougher boss fights, especially the game's super boss. And finally, we have Particio. After building up his father's business to record heights, his community has fallen to extreme poverty and now seeks to fix this. Particio is definitely the biggest improvement from the original game's merchant Tressa in terms of story. Particio helps the player gain access to a boat across the open ocean. He also has some of the more useful abilities, such as an ability that allows him to dodge physical attacks, and he's definitely one of the more uplifting narratives of showcasing someone who's been given such a negative hand throughout life, being portrayed profoundly, but still has a positive outlook in life. In fact, there's this one scene where he trusts Throne with a check for 8 billion leaves, which is insane. He's like, yeah, I need someone to trust to hold this check. Can you hold this? And she's like, very well. And you could definitely build that camaraderie from that, because you see a lot of these scenes where they trust one another without question, and it's built up throughout the course of the adventure through not only the travel banter but also the cross stories. So you definitely have that cross interaction between their narratives and the characters themselves that really showcase the camaraderie between the characters a lot more profoundly than in Octopath Traveler 1. Now let's talk about gameplay, starting with progression. The leveling system is basic enough. You earn experience and job points by defeating enemies. You then gain levels and use the job points to unlock specialized skills. There are 12 jobs, each has unique talents, and you can equip 4 of these unique talents per character, regardless if you have the job equipped. Each character has one primary job that cannot be changed, and you can equip one secondary job, which you can earn by collecting license from the job's guild. You can obtain 3 of these licenses for each of the core jobs through challenges and gathering key items, but the 4 exclusive jobs can only be equipped once. Exclusive jobs such as the Art Master and Inventor have very unique abilities only available by completing a lengthy side mission, but prove invaluable during the endgame content. You also have the 2 more endgame jobs, which include the Conjurer and the Anarchist, which are more of a gimmick class. You don't really need to use them, but once you gather them, they are available if you wish to use them. Once equipped, you can have access to the job's abilities during combat, with the exception of character-specific skills called EX skills, earned by completing the character's core story or finding hidden altars throughout the world. You simply go up to the hidden altar which found with a corresponding character, and you're granted the skill. This game has a lot of customization pairs, and it complements it with the equipment system. There's no best item. Instead, all of the top level weapons and armor have secondary functions that pair well with certain builds and situations. For example, the Sea God Spear and Double Tomahawk can hit twice at the cost of damage. The problem is that you cannot swap equipment between characters outside your core party, meaning everyone outside the 4 characters in your party cannot equip or remove items to the other party. This is strange since the end game you do get this function where you can swap equipment and remove certain items, even the ability to change your party outside the tavern NPC. I guess this was done for narrative purposes, as during the game it's made apparent that anyone not in your party simply waits at the tavern, but in the end game everyone travels together. Personally, I'm not a fan of this because I think that player convenience should take priority over narrative requirements. So maybe it's just me, but I thought that if you're going to give the player this, it should be provided since the beginning of the game. Now, I want to talk about the world. As I stated, you are free to go anywhere, but at the risk of taking on more powerful enemies, and some areas do require you to gain access to Particio's ship through the main story. The game does have a day and night cycle that alters what special talents you can have access to both in combat and when exploring the overworld. This will alter what NPCs are about and what path actions you can execute. Path actions allow you to interact with NPCs in a certain way, such as Throne being able to steal items during the day and knock people out at night. Oswald can obtain information during the day or mug people for their items at night, in which you engage in a one-on-one battle with the NPC, and so forth. Most of the abilities are repeats, such as both Throne and Cisne being able to knock people out at night. You'll need to use all of these abilities more actively than in the first game, but each of them definitely gives benefits. For example, when I got into a new town, I would just simply steal items from everyone within town and use Agnetha's ability to coerce items from people, because you get a definitely powerful set of items, but the more powerful the item, the low percentage of getting that item, and if you end up failing, you'll have to go to the tavern of the town and pay a fee in order to regain your reputation. This rarely happened to me unless I was trying to steal a very exotic item, and you really have to push it for you to actually get this, situation placed on you, and it serves nothing more than a tiny handicap. Like I said, you just go to the tavern and pay a small fee, and instantly you can engage with the NPCs again. Now, some of the NPCs are a bit tougher than usual, especially if you try to recruit them to your party, in which sometimes you'll have to fight them, but other times you'll just have to pay a hefty fee. But during the end game, money will become such an insignificant issue that you'll rarely have to deal with that. Regardless, I found myself stealing and interacting with every NPC, and some give mostly powerful items. In addition, the writers went all out and crafted some of these stories with the NPCs, such as this noble who engaged with a young child for political purposes. Now, let's talk about combat. The system hasn't changed from the original. The core purpose is still to identify the enemy's weaknesses, which is hidden until you expose it, then using that weakness to break their shielding, which has a number of hits before being broken. Once broken, the enemy loses all its turns for the current and upcoming set of turns, and loses all its defense points for maximized damage. The developers will often mix up this situation by removing the ability for whose turn is next, locking off enemy weaknesses, or swapping weaknesses altogether to keep you on your toes. The boost system works the same way. Each turn you gain a boost point, or BP, and you can hoard up to 5 points in total. Boosting increases the strength of any skill you use, with certain skills called divine skills, exclusive to that specific character, and can only be triggered with maximum boost. Added to the mix is latent powers. Exclusive abilities with unique charges give you access to another unique ability for each of the characters, such as Throne gain another turn, Hikari gain a unique set of attacks, and Particio fill in his entire boost gauge. Now let's talk about the game's visuals. Octopath Traveler 1 was already an exceptionally beautiful game, but the developers somehow took that winning visual design and somehow improved it. Thanks to the better use of 3D objects and particle effects, it creates a lot more depth in each of the areas you'll explore. Bringing it all together is just a general atmosphere that makes this entire world feel alive and full of wonder. The characters have incredible voice actors that go above and beyond with more voiced interactions than before, and it's truly amazing how far they went with this game. They definitely were given a bigger budget considering how well Octopath Traveler 1 did, and they really used it in the most correct way possible. They even added more movement to the character models to make them feel more alive. Unlike the original, where the characters would just stand still and make occasional movements here and there, the models move independently to one another to simulate movement. To showcase this even more dedication are the weapons themselves, which all have unique designs, even attack animations that have you just highlight how much passion the developers went into this game. More character movement in battles, more weapon designs, everything about this game just screams incredible levels of passion. The enemy character models also have similar upgrades. They have a lot more movement to them, and while they look extraordinary just like in the first game, now certain attacks will have the character models move in distinct ways, which is definitely just amazing. The soundtrack is an absolute gem. Square Enix is known for making some amazing soundtracks, and Octopath Traveler 2 goes even harder. Taking existing tracks and remixing them, adding unique final boss themes for each of the characters, and moving ideal music when traveling is still a wonder to behold. I can't play any of it in its raw form because Square Enix has a notorious reputation for striking channels for playing their music without enough context, but just take my word for it. The endgame content for Octopath Traveler 2 is definitely an improvement from the first game. As I stated, there's a final chapter after completing the mainline stories for each of the characters that highlight how everyone's stories are connected, as opposed to the original game where there was a final chapter hidden among all the side stories. Now, this game does include side stories, highlighting optional boss fights and finishing up story elements from the main story, all leading up to an amazing epilogue that everyone reflects on this grand journey that you went on. Unlike the first game where the true final boss, as I stated, was hidden behind a series of side stories that you needed to hunt down that didn't really add much weight to the character's core narratives and was just there just to give some sort of final encounter for everyone to engage in. There's still an optional super boss that will test everyone's skill that you've learned, your preparation talents, and finally your execution, so prepare for that. But the final super boss, I have to say, I was hoping for something a little different. But either way, it's a good final super boss fight. Despite Octopath Traveler 2 being everything I loved about the first game and more, resolving so many of its issues, I did have some issues. The biggest is the grind, which was also a major issue in Octopath Traveler 1. Leveling guides have been made to offset the massive grinding requirements you'll need to complete the mainline story and the optional super boss, but it seems criminal that you do not share experience with everyone, just those in your active party. This was a major issue in the first game, and it's still here for some reason, and if you don't actively switch party members out, be prepared for grinding for a couple of hours if you use the leveling guides in order to get to the level requirements needed in order to progress their story. It's just something that could have been easily offset with just sharing experience among everyone. I just don't see why there isn't an option for that. You could have had an option like in Pokemon Sun and Moon where you could turn it on or off if the player wants a more traditional RPG grind. But then again, Final Fantasy VII also had an experience sharing system. Granted, it was a very poor experience sharing system, but it was still there. Another issue is the mini-map. Now, this is a personal issue for myself. I felt like the map isn't detailed enough to showcase all the various paths that you can take. Now, the exit points and points of interest are still there, but there's no, like, pathing that showcases where you can go and where you can't. And considering that if you don't have the avoid or evasion maneuvers ability, which limits random encounters, be prepared for a lot of them, and you don't get that item that removes encounters entirely until you beat the game's super boss, which I think is a poor final option for an item. Either way, I felt like the mini-map could have offset a lot of these issues. The final issue is something I already discussed, but it's still a profound problem. You cannot replay story chapters. For a game this long, I clocked in around 100 hours in order to get the platinum. Having to replay the entire game to replay story sections seems unnecessary. There is no reason why I should be able to go to the tavern and replay previous chapters, seeing that there is no unique dialogue among party members depending on who's in your party, and grinding would have been offset by this by the sheer entertainment value of just having to replay, certain sections that you really found very entertaining. So, not really sure why that's not there. Maybe they could add it in a patch or something, but for now, it is definitely a problem. As a major fan of Octopath Traveler 2, it exceeded my expectations thoroughly. It is an exceptional RPG for those who love Final Fantasy turn-based games and retro RPGs like Breath of Fire, Dragon Quest, and like I stated, the older Final Fantasy games. It's my personal recommendation for Game of the Year 2023, and it's something I hope you'll play. And now, I should state this, if you do not like RPGs, this game will not connect with you in any way, shape, or form. This is a game for fantasy RPG fans, and it definitely goes hard in every aspect for that. It caters to a very specific audience, and it does that extremely well. All in all, as a fan of RPG games, this is my game of the year for 2023 at the moment, and it's something I hope you'll play and I hope you'll engage with. Anyway, that's my review. If you like the video, like it. If you dislike it, dislike it. Again, Square Enix, thank you for providing me a review copy. I really enjoyed the game. Until next time, have a good one.